Okay, so for our last video for this module number 9, we're going to talk about evolutionary trends in sports tourism. So basically, we're going to talk about the different major changes that we've seen in sports tourism throughout the last decades. And also, we're going to look at the different factors that contributed to the changes that we've seen in sports tourism and sports tourism. So first, let's discuss what is the life cycle of a tourism destination. How does it start and how does it end, if it does end? So Butler in 1980 suggested 6 phases of the tourism destination life cycle. The first one is exploration. This is when the area remains unspoiled and tourism facilities are minimal and the area attracts few visitors. So this is the time wherein hindi pa fully promoted yung area, and because hindi pa siya fully promoted, konti pa lang yung pumupunta doon, there's not many economic activities happening there, and it's unspoiled. So ibig sabihin, if it's a natural attraction, then there's not much environmental problems there yet, or no environmental problems there yet. The second phase is involvement. Additional facilities are provided by locals and small businesses. A tourist season will start to be recognized for this specific area. So, for example, napansin nila, dumadami na yung mga taong bumibisita sa beach na ito. Probably, the locals would be incentivized to, build their own bed and breakfast areas. No, they would have a shared apartment for the tourists, and probably locals would be incentivized to put up small businesses related to food and beverage, accommodation. Probably they'd start to create tourism products, and during this time they will also start to identify which months in the calendar are peak and off seasons for them to be able to plan as a whole in the community for the arrival of tourists. Next is development. So, through the local government and the national tourism boards, the area is now acknowledged as a tourist destination. The host country may start to actively advertise and develop the area. So during this time, nag-i-invite na tayo ng larger businesses to create large accommodations and high-end food and beverage businesses and other high-end tourism products. And at the same time, pinopromote na rin siya for international tourism. So probably if many years ago, Coron in Palawan used to be an unknown area. It used to be, it's still pristine, but it used to be a place wherein we didn't have so many visitors. But since the local government units and of course the national government has seen potentials for Coron, it was developed, and then we started seeing corporations and business persons and organizations trying to put up new tourism products, accommodations, restaurants in that area to be able to increase its tourism potentials. And probably one way to also increase the development of the area is to also open, transportation avenues. For example, in Boracay, dati, in order for you to go to Boracay, you have to go to Calibo first, and from Calibo, you have to take the bus or the van and then go to Katiklan. But now, not really now, but siguro a few years back, we started opening building an airport in Katiklan so that we can directly fly people to Boracay. Pero dati wala, diretso muna ng Calibo. And this is an example of opening up further the tourism area for more tourists, both domestic and international. And then we have consolidation. The area retains its numbers in terms of visitor, although increase in tourists may not be as rapid as before. So during this time, na-maximize na yung mga pwedeng gawin ng mga tourism products, accommodations, and restaurants in that area, and hospitality potentials. And then tensions may start to develop between the locals and the tourists. And probably one good example of this is La Union, when they closed down Boracay last year and people started to go to La Union during the summer, and then the locals in La Union were very not happy about how the tourists left that place, which they left it very dirty. So, yon. So, this is now an area or a time wherein the certain tourist location or destination is experiencing consolidation. And then, if not cared for very well, the tourism destination can reach stagnation, wherein the resort or the destination may show a decline in facilities, no, marami nang nasisira, and therefore a decline in tourist numbers. This is often down to facilities becoming outdated, run down, and receiving little maintenance, and also the environmental detriments of accepting tourists can also be seen. Like for example, this picture is a picture in Boracay, wherein because of the dirt that has been accumulated, there's a lot of moss and greening of the supposedly pristine white sands of Boracay. This is prior to the Boracay cleanup. So, Boracay has also experienced stagnation because of this. And then, some tourist destination who admit that they are already in stagnation could do or be moved to rejuvenation, wherein the area may receive funding or invest in itself in order to rejuvenate again and gain back its images. Visitor numbers may start to increase again. So, this is what we did when we did the Boracay cleanup, and definitely after the Boracay cleanup, it attracted more visitors again, especially those na medyo na turn off sa Boracay because of its overcrowdedness and dirtiness, before the cleanup. So, that's an example of rejuvenating a given tourism attraction. Now, if after rejuvenation, then we can go back to development, but some eventually die out. There are tourism destinations that used to be so beautiful, but now they're almost unheard of. And this phase is called decline. So during the decline, the tourism industry will decrease, resulting in a lot of job losses. The overall image of the destination will be negatively impacted. Probably the decline could be because of external factors as well. Like for example, in Bali before, there's a huge decline after the tsunami hit them, but definitely they went to rejuvenation after that. For example, now we have the COVID-19 pandemic, so definitely there's a big decline in most tourism destinations that are outdoors, or generally all types of tourism destination. And the overall image of the destination was negatively impacted as well. And an example also of one of the more common tourism destinations that goes through decline are Olympic destinations, diba? And you have seen how, areas were in Olympic Stadium and sports venues that were built for Olympics were left and dilapidated after the Olympics, instead of being rejuvenated as a sports tourism attraction to be able to gain economic benefits from it, naiwan na lang siya. So, hindi na sila na-rejuvenate. So, this is an example of a tourism destination decline. Just like tourism destinations, sporting activities and sports also have life cycles. And of course, we know a lot of sports that weren't considered sports before but are now considered as sports. And from, unknown sports to very highly celebrated sports. So what are the indicators that makes a sport a well-celebrated sport that's worthy of becoming a tourism attraction? So one would be, of course, number of participants. The more participants, the more it legitimizes the sports. The number of spectators watching also legitimizes the sport. So for example, one reason why we have esports now, is because we have a lot of people who are really doing good and engaged in esports. And we've also seen that, especially when you do streaming or even doing esports in large locations, that you'll be able to bring with you an audience. So that increases the legitimization of esports as a sport. And then you would see sophistication of rules and facilities of where the sport is being done. Like for example, yung mga sepak takraw na dati ginagawa lang natin as, a normal activity. Ngayon, meron na siyang rules, especially when we put it in the Olympics or in the regional games. Even the dance sport, diba? Yung sayaw, may rules siya for aesthetic purposes, no, in from the dance part. But for the sports part, when we placed it in the regional games, in the international games, nagkakaroon siya ngayon ng mas stringent na mga rules. And then you will put indicators and criteria for each movement in order to place a score in it. And once a sport starts to have that kind of stringent ruling, then it further legitimizes itself as a sport. Next is level of skill development. So when there are now trainings that are available in order for you to become good as a certain sport, it increases the value of that sport. Commodification, if you can already sell merch, or you can already sell the sport, or you can already put advertisers in your sport, then you know that the sport is getting big. And then of course, professionalization. If you can pay people to play a certain sport, then that increases the value of the sport, Even esports, binabaya na kumikita na yung mga nagja-judge at yung mga nag-engage in esports, So these are indicators, that looks into legitimization of sports, increasing the value of sports. Now, there are many factors that influences innovation in sport. Remember, we're talking about evolutionary trends, and we're going to talk about how sports evolve, from being a non-sport, for a simple game, to a sport. And also looking at how the sports that are already established also change in time. So, of course, we have recreational sports, For example, you have your marathons, and of course you have your competitive sport, like of course the ones that you see that has professional leagues, For recreational sport, we see leisure innovation, because remember, we do recreational sport for leisure, and for competitive sports we see performance incremental change, And what are those factors or trends that influence these things? We have economic trends, political trends in relation to federations, social trends, technological trends, For instance, for example, in swimming, diba, now we have more higher end mga swimming apparel, and swimsuits, in order to improve buoyancy in the water. And also environmental trends, like for example, because we have a lot of climate change, then we do a lot of indoorization of sports. And these changes and innovations are taken by geographical origins of the recreational sport and by sporting institutions or organizations in competitive sports. And these are disseminated, and these are being reported by media, being taken up by tourism, and are being adopted by manufacturers that are related to the sport. And these are basically all the mechanisms that makes changes in sports more acceptable and innovations in sport to happen. Now, again, in tourism, one of the more recent innovations in sports tourism is the nostalgia sports tourism. So I've explained this, I think, twice already. So it's a part of sporting heritage, It's very important because we know that sport is a very important institution in our society, and therefore history in relation to sport must be documented and must be celebrated. Examples of attractions and destinations that can hold nostalgia sports tourism attractions are sports halls of fames, museums, collections of memorabilia, and also the high-profile sporting venues can also be considered as as tourism venues, An example would be in the Philippines, diba, in Cubao nagkaroon ng laban si Muhammad Ali, and that's the reason why we have now the Ali Mall, and it could have been a good parang springboard to create some sort of nostalgia sports tourism attraction in that area, pero hindi yata siya nagawa, naging more shopping and leisure tourism siya doon sa Cubao. Another form or another emergent form of nostalgia sports tourism are fantasy sports programs, wherein fans can spend a week or a weekend training with and finally competing against the legends of the game. So, of course, these are for high-profile sports tourism managers who really have access and networks with these celebrities, And these are very good for elderly and retired sports celebrities, no, in order for them to have some sort of interaction with each other. And definitely, especially for the more affluent sectors of the demographics for sports tourists, magbabayad talaga sila. Imagine, getting to play with a now retired celebrated sports celebrity in a given venue. Definitely, people will travel for that, no? Like for example, pag pumupunta dito yung mga sports legends, pumunta dito sila Kobe, di ba? Nung pumupunta dito sila Michael Jordan, talagang yung mga tao would go from their peripheral areas to the central locations to just see a glimpse of their sports idol. So that's an example of nostalgia sports tourism in terms of fantasy sports programs. Now, what are the key trends that we see in sport in the entry of the new millennium? One, the increasing development of individual versus collective sports. So, dumadami na yung mga sports natin that can be that are not team-based, mountain climbing, skateboarding, skiing, so surfing. So, mas marami ng individual sports na nai-introduce and are being used as sports tourism attractions. Next, diversification of sports participation model. So now, hindi na, for example, marathon used to be something that is only for highly competitive, highly trained individuals. Pero ngayon, di ba, marathons are being open to whole families, to lolos and lolas, to children, to everyone. It's being used for purposes of fundraising, and for sponsorships, because there is now that greater inclusion of non-competitive players in sports participation. Mas lumalaki yung ating possible markets for sports tourism. And then we are seeing exaggerated segmentation of sports disciplines. Like for example, we're also creating sports with CrossFit, di ba? Marathons, may pentathlon, meron kang triathlon, meron kang decathlon. So, dahil nag-exaggerate or nag-extend yung mga possibilities for each sport, and then you are inviting more and more markets into the sports activities that are being done. And then we have adaptation of sports activities to the constraints of urban life. So as we have explained a lot in this course, there's a lot of indoorization. Like for example, the mountain climbing, we can already do that indoors using wall climbing. Diba? Extreme biking, we can already create an indoor area where you can do your extreme biking, your extreme skateboarding. Diba? So, you don't have to get out of your central location in order for you to do all of this, used to be outdoor sports. And the continuous development of the mythology of adventure in a natural environment. So, despite, increasing indoorization and urbanization of sports, tumataas din yung call of the wild, adventure tourism, mountaineering, diba? It is now becoming a trend. Surfing, adventures in the outdoors is also something that's being advocated as a pull factor for sports tourism nowadays. Now, with all of the trends that are seen in sports tourism, what are the different areas that we are seeing as factors to these trends? First one, we have economic. And what are the drivers of economic trending in sports tourism? Syempre, globalization. So, now that we are more connected, it's easy for us to travel. Nagkakaroon na ng mas diversified na mga regional games. It's easier to set up, international games now because of globalization. And of course, media. Yung mga sport na used to be hindi natin alam in the Philippines, we get to know about them because we get to learn about them using broadcast media and internet. There are also political drivers that shape sports tourism. Of course, there's that usual issue between developed and developing nations. Developing nations being less prepared and less trained for sports because of lack of funds to be trained and therefore developing nations aren't as incentivized to join a lot of sports activities outside, but usually developed countries they do. And of course, because of terrorism, there's a lot of changes that we need to do for international sporting events to protect possible terrorist attacks in these areas. No? And we have seen some sporting events used as grounds for riots, aggressive behavior, and terrorism before. And definitely for those who are trying to create large-scale mega events as a sport tourism attractions, security must be an important consideration. And then we are going to see a lot of changes in sports tourism because of the changing population, socio-demographic all over the world. We have a changing youth ideas and ideologies. The youth are more, it's either they're more incentivized to get into a sport, or they are looking for or creating a sport of their own, like for example, esports. And of course, we have an increasing aging population. And this is a possible market for a more elderly-friendly type of sports attraction. And then, of course, one major driver of trends in sports tourism are technological. And probably one reason why we don't have a lot of sports tourists in sports attraction is because of globalization. There's off-site spectatorship. So, pwede ka nang makapanood ng mga international games without really leaving your home. So, this probably disincentivizes you from actually traveling to a certain Olympic Games or a certain regional games. Kasi pwede mo naman panoorin, di ba? And you can also do pay-per-view to be able to watch high-stakes games like boxing. So, for those who don't have the money to travel, they still get to watch it, and therefore it influences how to make sports tourism attractions more enticing to these people na okay na nanonood na lang sa bahay nila. And of course, increasing virtual reality, like for example, Wii Sports, they can already mimic the activities that are done in sports, and therefore may decrease, the desire of certain people to actually go out, to be able to do the sport kasi pwede naman nilang gawin during using virtual reality. And of course, we've explained this a lot of times, indoorization. So therefore, instead of going out into peripheral areas, traveling in order for you to do the sport that you like, if that sport is available in your urban center, it's found indoors, you are safe inside, the tendency is for you to just do your sporting there instead of traveling for sport. And of course, sports tourism is also intensified by, advancement in transportation. So we have bigger planes now, faster planes, more ecologically friendly alternatives for travel, so it's easier for certain people to go from one place to another now. And therefore, it is a positive thing it's a technologically positive thing for sports tourism. And as we were explaining earlier, sports are now changing, and we have now the dawn of postmodern sports that are outside the usual realm of modern sports. And these are some of the differences between modern sport and postmodern sports. For modern sports, rules are sacred. But for postmodern sport, rules can be modified and experimented upon. And this could be possible areas wherein we could, create new sports tourism attractions. Modern sport is usually conservative ang team leadership, but for postmodern, it's really more adventurous. So again, another area we can consider to add more sports tourism attractions in our destination. For modern sports, usually you join the sports as amateurs, and there's respect for authority and character building. But for postmodern sport, we really go for professionalism. So we really want the new sports to become professional sports, and this is what happened to esports and extreme sports. And for organization and management, there's a central control of who says what needs to be done in a given sport. But for postmodern sport, the authority is diffused, so it's actually from the standpoint of where the sport is being held. For financial structure, usually it's gate receipts. So, pagkuha ng manonood. But for postmodern sport, there's more areas wherein you can get financial gains from the sport. It's either sponsorship, television rights, and sport as a business. Sports tourism is also part of it. For venues and facilities, there's a basic seating at Stadia. But now for postmodern sport, we have customized seating and video support, especially to help even those who are very far away from the event. The promotion of modern sport was limited, but now extensive na siya because of globalization and expansiveness of media. For viewing, live match attendance nung modern sport, nung mas maganda kung nanonood ka on-site. But in postmodern sport, mas madami na yung TV audience or internet audience. For spectator preference, noon, display lang ng kanilang traditional craft, ng kanilang ability. But now, some sports spectators, they want drama. Diba? Gusto na ng konting entertainment, konting pag-aaway, konting sagutan, para mapag-usapan, para mas maging exciting yung sport. Noon, the fan loyalties were singular, parochial loyalty, but now there are now multiple loyalties and all special skills. Like for example, you can be in the Philippines and you can root for a football team in France, or a football team in Barcelona, and it doesn't matter, because you like the game. For the sports market, undifferentiated ang market natin before, but now fragmented na when we have niche market. So I was explaining earlier for marathons, diba dati trained individuals na tumatakbo sa mga marathons. Now, a lay person can join a 21-kilometer run, and it's something that is still acceptable. Next, we have coaching and training. Mas rigid ang coaching at training noon. But for now, we have a blend of science and naturalistic practices in coaching and training. It's not by the book. There's more emotion and psychological involvement in training. So that is the comparison between modern and postmodern sport. And this could be possible inspirations for us to draw from in order to improve sports tourism in our attraction or destination. So in this video, we were able to talk about evolutionary trends in tourism. We talk about tourism life cycles, and then we also talk about sports life cycles. And then we talk about evolutionary trends in sports tourism.